This thing is, can you hear me? Wonderful. Well, good evening, everybody. My name is David Tolles. I work at the University of Wisconsin-River Falls as an outreach coordinator. Got a few different roles in the office, but one of the things that's really important to me is focusing on financial aid and talking with families a lot about that kind of college affordability piece. And so that's what I'm going to cover with us tonight. We're going to cover a lot of different stuff, but I kind of have three main points. The first, we're going to be college cost, and then what's actually included in that cost, and what do institutions tell you about that cost. Difference between grants, loans, scholarships, work-study, how does that play out by different institutions? And then how does the student actually receive any federal financial aid or state financial aid as well? So right now, it's right around 72% of students attending college in the United States are getting some sort of federal financial aid. Now, about 56% or so of those students are actually taking it and utilizing it, but the vast majority of students still earn some sort of federal financial aid based on their FAFSA. Like I said, the first thing we're going to cover is going to kind of be college cost. And so the big thing that I always tell folks to think about is the difference between net price and sticker price. So net price is going to be the cost that students are actually going to pay at that particular institution. Sticker price is going to be the cost that the institution says it costs. And that's basically going to be everything added up. But that sticker price does not include scholarships or grants or any tuition waivers that will be applied for students individually either. So if you're looking at different institutions and exploring different institutions, make sure that you're focusing on the net price and not the sticker price. You can get to the net price by utilizing what you'll see as net price calculators. Every institution that receives federal financial aid is required to have some sort of net price calculator on their website. Some of them are better than others, but they're going to be there for you to look at. Basically, what you'll do is you'll put in your kind of information, kind of general information, looking at your taxes, your income, assets, pieces like that. It'll give you the institution's overall cost, and then it'll kind of calculate for you what you can kind of expect to pay. It's going to be an estimate, so it's not going to be 100% accurate. The 100% accuracy will come once you've actually filed the FAFSA, been admitted to the institution, the financial aid office has reviewed everything, and then gotten that award letter back to you. But I always encourage students to check out net price calculators, especially if you're looking at institutions that have larger sticker prices. As you start looking at different scholarship opportunities and pieces like that, you'll see that sticker price drop dramatically to get to your kind of overall net price. And so I always make sure to tell everybody to check out different net price calculators at different institutions' websites. That's the piece that I just talked about. So the financial aid process itself. So again, FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. And then there's also this thing called a CSS Profile. The CSS Profile is specific to typically small, private institutions, and they typically have a larger sticker price. The CSS Profile goes a little bit deeper into families' finances, a little bit more specifics into assets. It kind of gives a more full overall financial picture, and that allows individual institutions to give kind of more specific financial aid to individual students. If you're thinking about kind of the region that we're generally in, McAllister is one of the schools that does a CSS Profile in Minnesota. Milwaukee's the only school in Wisconsin that's doing it right now. Lawrence had it, and they haven't announced that they're bringing it back for this year or not. That's actually through the College Board. But as you're looking at different institutions, you'll see, again, those smaller private schools will sometimes have a CSS Profile in addition to the FAFSA. And then each individual institution may or may not have a separate scholarship process. University of Wisconsin-River Falls, for example, once students are admitted, they get access to our individual scholarship application. You'll see some schools that will award scholarships based directly on the admissions application. Some schools will have a separate application, and then some schools will look just at FAFSA or the CSS profile as well. Here's kind of tips and tricks about the FAFSA. I always encourage everyone to fill out the FAFSA for two really important reasons. The first is that you never know what you're actually going to get on the FAFSA. And so every financial aid office will look at it differently. They will utilize it differently. And you're never going to know unless you fill it out. And so I always encourage everyone to fill it out. The second thing is that if something were to happen in families, and there's a dramatic shift in income, there's a dramatic drop in income, job loss, something terrible were to happen, it's easier for institutions to make adjustments to your grants, your scholarships, things like that, if you already have a FAFSA on file. If you're going through a terrible situation and then you have to file the FAFSA and then wait for the institution to come back, that can just make the kind of a worse situation worse. So I always encourage everyone to do the FAFSA as soon as you can. When you file into the FAFSA, it'll give you some additional information about the things that you should look for. And it'll kind of keeps kind of documents that you'll need to file throughout there. The sheet that you got when you walked in has a place for your FSA ID and PIN number, so you can keep that for safekeeping as well. You'll need one for both students and families when filling out the FAFSA. You'll also sometimes see people who are considered preparers. They will file the FAFSA for you. Sometimes it can be benefit. 99.9% of the time, you do not need a preparer to help you file the FAFSA. I always encourage folks to check in with either their high school for FAFSA resources or check with the institutions that you're applying to. Most of the time, you can get any questions that you have answered by either the high school or the institutions that you're applying to. Most people do not need to go and utilize somebody else to help them file the FAFSA. You'll also see sometimes websites will charge you to file the FAFSA and put some additional information in there for you. Don't worry about that either. Just make sure that you're on the correct student aid website, which is a government website, and it's going to be free for you to file the FAFSA too. October 1st, which is upcoming very fast, is the day that FAFSA opens. So they're finalizing all the kind of information in there. During this week, the test demo site just got uploaded for counselors and financial aid resources to look at. So we'll be able to get in there this week and check this out. And then you all can start filing the FAFSA starting on October 1st. And again, I always encourage everybody to do it as soon as possible. When you head to StudentAid.gov, you'll see kind of what you're seeing on the screen up there. I always encourage anybody, no matter what institution you think you're applying to make sure that you're filling out the FAFSA. You can apply up to 10 institutions per FAFSA. So if you have multiple schools that you're thinking about, just go ahead and put all the schools that you're maybe potentially interested in. You can update that and change that as well too. So you're not locked into the 10 schools that you put in. So if you decide not to apply somewhere, you can remove that school, you can add schools, and they'll get that information in the financial aid office and be able to get that information back to you as well. CSS Profiles has got a similar kind of login page. Again, this is specific to College Board. So if your student has taken an AP exam and they have a College Board account, or they've taken a standardized test and have a College Board account, they'll use that same information to log into the CSS financial aid profile, and again, fill that out through College Board's website as well. If you're not applying to a school that requires a CSS profile, you don't need to worry about that. And those institutions will tell you, typically on the front end, if they are a CSS school or not. The other thing about CSS is it's in addition to the FAFSA, and so if you do end up applying to institutions that require the CSS, just make sure that you're also doing the FAFSA as well. The other big piece about FAFSA that kind of connects back to scholarships is that Some institutions will do and tie their need-based scholarships to FAFSA information. So River Falls, for example, will award a lot of our need-based students their institutional scholarships based on what they put on the FAFSA and the information that we receive according to their EFC, which is the expected family contribution. We'll talk about that in a second as well. I always encourage students to make sure you're looking at the institutions you're applying for scholarships, but then also look in your kind of local community, local businesses. Oftentimes you'll see corporations have some different scholarships for students. Sometimes small businesses will have scholarships for students. There's a few different national sites out there as well. Some are better than others, but College Board does have a pretty reputable list of institutions, or websites that award scholarships for students that you can apply for that are kind of more nationally specific scholarships as well. The last piece I always talk about when it comes to overall kind of like debt and taking on debt, a lot of students are taking on debt to pay and finance their education, but I always tell students to make sure that you're not borrowing more than you need. So as you're preparing to take out loans, as you're going through that process of accepting what loans you want to take out, make sure you're doing a little bit of math and figuring out what do you actually need to take out, what do you need to afford for that semester, so that you're not sitting with extra money taken out in loans that you actually don't need to pay for educational or living costs for that academic year. So next piece we're going to touch on is going to be overall kind of cost of attendance. Tuition and fees. This is the cost for you to be in a seat earning credits towards a degree. Institutions will bill this a little bit differently. Some institutions will bill per credit or they'll charge per credit. Some do a tuition plateau. Most of the schools in the UW system, for example, charge a flat tuition fee. 12 to 18 credits will cost you the same. Some schools will charge their fees separately. Some schools include their segregated fees as part of their overall tuition price. Make sure you're checking for that. On-campus housing, this is typically just going to be something that you'll be billed for right away. Additionally, some schools will pay or have one bill for tuition and housing together. Other institutions will have you pay for tuition and housing separately. So just make sure you're checking out that information as well. And then if you're on an on-campus meal plan, that also is something that the institution itself will specifically bill you for. The other big thing on here that you're not going to see, textbooks. So some institutions will have you pay for textbooks separately. Some institutions will include them as part of tuition. I always encourage students just to check out and make sure they know whether or not textbooks are going to be included. UW River Falls, for example, includes their textbooks as part of their overall tuition cost. The other one sometimes you'll see is laptops. Some institutions will add a laptop and they give that to students for their first year and then just build it into overall tuition cost. If you're living off campus, obviously they're not gonna bill you for that, but I always do tell students to make sure that you're taking that into account. And if you've paid to live on campus your first year and now you're moving off campus, just make sure that you're taking into account what that cost differential may or may not be individually as well. And then personal expenses. Obviously, we're not going to bill you for that, but things for students to take into account as you're figuring out how much money do I actually need to have this year. If you're not working and you need to have a little bit more spending money, you can maybe take out a little bit more in loans. If you're really cost conscious and don't want to take out more in loans, then take out less just to make up to your overall bill. That's a personal preference, something I also encourage students and families to talk about individually too. So how do institutions address need? So what we look at as an institution is what we call cost of attendance, and so that is how much the institution says it costs students to be there. Cost of attendance does include both billable items and non-billable items. So again, tuition, living on campus, eating on campus. River Falls, for example, also puts in right around $3,000 for personal expenses, travel expenses, pieces like that. You'll see different institutions have different cost metrics in there, but that does get added into your kind of overall cost of attendance. So you'll typically see that your overall cost of attendance will be higher than what your actual student bill is. Cost of attendance, and then we take out what we consider expected financial assistance, grants, loans, scholarships, pieces like that. That all leaves you with what's considered the expected family contribution, cost of attendance, minus expected family contribution. That leaves you with what we consider student financial need. Again, each individual institution will then use that need to look at a couple different things. If you're applying to institutions that are full need or meet full need, that means that they will cover the full need of all students who apply. There's not that many full need institutions out there, so as you're looking at what that kind of overall gap might be between expected family contribution, what the overall need is, different ways that the FAFSA will be able to kind of fill in that gap for you, and ideally that you wouldn't have a gap or you'd have a negative gap in that space. These are all the things that go into actually assessing your expected family contribution. So it's income, assets are part of that included in there. The big question I typically get from families, your 401k retirement package is not included as an asset in there, so don't need to worry about that. Any savings that you have that are specifically for education, so if you have a 529 plan, that automatically gets put in there. Things in your savings account, that does get added as part of assets. Family size, age of older parent, if you have 2 or more students who are in college at the same time, that gets built in there. If you're closer to retirement age or further away from retirement age, that gets built in there. And then any special circumstances. Each institution handles this a little bit differently, but you can connect with each individual institution and connect on what your own specific special circumstance might be. So if it's health-related expenses, if there's been a death in the family, if you've had a national disaster, things like that, each individual institution can work with you through that specific piece. There are really 4 main types of financial aid. First are grants. Grants are essentially free money, money that you and the student are not going to have to pay back. The most popular one you'll typically hear about is going to be the Pell Grant. There's also a federal supplemental grant for students, state grants, and there's also have institutional grants as well. The big thing that I always tell students is that state grants typically run out the fastest. And so if you have a lower EFC or an EFC closer to 0, definitely make sure that you're filing your FAFSA as soon as you can, because some of those state grant money will run out. Scholarships. Scholarships will vary institution to institution. Private schools will typically give more money in scholarships because their sticker price is typically more. Public schools traditionally will give less money in scholarships because their sticker price is typically going to be lower. You can earn scholarships for a wide variety of different things that students have done so far in their academic and non-academic journey. Athletic scholarships could be academic-based. Sometimes we'll see students get scholarships for art or music or leadership opportunities, different pieces like that. Most institutional scholarships can be competitive, and they'll look at a wide variety of different aspects for students. Some are based entirely on academic merit. Some are based on non-academic merit. Again, depends on the institution and depends how much scholarship dollars are giving out for individual students. The other thing on here too, like I mentioned before, is make sure that you're checking locally first and then expanding out. It's typically easier for students to get scholarship dollars from a local opportunity than it is to win a national scholarship competition, for example. Work study. So this is on-campus employment. This is, again, based on financial need. Each individual institution also handles this a little bit differently. Most students are working somewhere around 10 to 15 hours per week. I've seen a little bit higher numbers from some students as you get further along in your academic career, but we do try and limit those numbers for first-year students just because they are getting acclimated to college, going through that kind of overall transition phase, and want to give them some time to work into their overall kind of time management standpoint as well. Wages will also vary depending on institution, but you'll typically see 3 different tier levels for employment opportunities for work study based on what the student is going to be doing as well. And then loans. So you've got subsidized and unsubsidized. Subsidized loans means that the government is paying the interest while students are enrolled at the institution. Unsubsidized means that the student is paying the interest, and interest is accruing while the student is enrolled. Another one I would point out for students is typically the Parent Plus loan. That's a loan that will be taken out, the parents would take it out for the students, and then that gets applied to the student's individual bill. That one is one to be careful about because full loan will be taken out no matter how much money you actually need. So you want to make sure that you get in there and look individually and figure out how much money do I actually need from an individual bill if you were to go to that Parent Plus loan. Private loans are listed on there. I always tell folks to exhaust all of your federal loan options before going to a private loan option. There is a ton of information also out there, some good, some not so good. I always tell folks to make sure that you're checking in with trusted resources. Start with the institutions you're applying to, start with your high school, be able to connect with those resources first, and they'll be able to typically give you some pretty good resources to check in as you're going through the financial aid process. NACAC, which is Association for Collegiate Admission Counseling, they have their own kind of section for financial aid pieces. You'll see the financial aid toolkit by the Department of Education. That's a really good resource for a lot of students. And then the Federal Student Aid website, or FSA website, also has a ton of resources for students and families to look at as well. Tons of ways and answers a ton of your questions. They updated that recently, and so you can see some really cool information in there if you plug in individual questions that you'll have. It's smart enough to kind of answer those questions for you as you're going through the process. Last piece that I always leave folks with is just, I always encourage students and families to have conversations around financing their degree. I think that the earlier you start that conversation, the easier it is to have. And so if you're starting that conversation as a sophomore or a junior, beginning of senior year, it's definitely better than having that conversation towards the end of senior year. Especially if your student has found a school that they want to go to, not really sure if we can afford it. Having that conversation in April and May is a lot harder than having that conversation in September and October. And so I always encourage families to go ahead and start that conversation as soon as you feel comfortable. And again, you have a ton of resources at both the high school side and the institution side as well to help you navigate through that process. And that is what I have for you all. Anyone have any individual questions for me? Great question. They are doing prior year. So for 2022 FAFSA, they will look at your 2020 taxes. I don't have my contact information on this slide. However, my contact information is on the back side of that handout that you got. So if you do have any individual questions, just go ahead and contact the admissions office at River Falls and ask for David, and they'll be able to get you in contact with me. I do have some River Falls specific packets that have my specific email on it that I can hand out for you as well. But don't have any other questions for me. Thank you for hanging out with me. I love talking about FAFSA. Like I said, if you have any additional questions, just please go ahead and reach back out.